My name is Matt Johnson, and I am the Civic Engagement Associate at the National Congress of American Indians, and welcome to our Civic Engagement webinar series. Today, we are going to focus on taking action in 2020. This is a part of an ongoing series that we have been doing here at NCAI. We're going to hear from several leaders from the state of New Mexico working on census and native vote. Information will include best practices on outreach for the 2020 census and voting amidst the COVID-19 challenges. We're so glad that you joined us today and encourage you to watch for our webinar series as we try to hold them actually bi-weekly, and they will focus on the importance of civic engagement in our tribal nations and feature a variety of topics and various guest speakers from time to time. I encourage you to join our listserv for announcements by emailing census@ncai.org. You can also, we also announce our webinars on our social media through our civic engagement broadcast and list them on our website. If you missed any of our webinars, the recordings are available on our NCI YouTube page on our website or on our website, I should say, our website, indiancountrycounts.org, under events and webinars. So we'll go over today's agenda, which is, I just provided a welcome. And next we'll go into an update on the current state of the 2020 census. That'll be followed by a presentation on specific census efforts in AIN communities. And then we'll follow by best practices to increase our census participation, followed by a native vote and policy updates, and finally Q&A and wrap up. Our speakers today are going to be myself, for those who didn't hear, my name is Matt Johnson. I'm the Civic Engagement Associate at the National Congress of American Indians. Sandra Mitrovich, who is the Wilma Mankiller Fellow at the National Congress of American Indians. And then our special guest presenters are Charlotte Little, who's with the New Mexico Pueblo. She's the New Mexico Pueblo Census Coordinator with the New Mexico State Complete Count Committee. We also have Ates Chavez, the Executive Director of the Native American Voters Alliance Education Project, and Jamie Gloshay, the Urban Census Coordinator and Tribal Subcommittee Chair for the New Mexico Statewide Complete Count Committee. Once our speakers are done with their presentations, we will reserve some time for question and answer at the end, and also an opportunity for attendees to share information about their own efforts in their community related to census and voter engagement. Before we started, however, I'm going to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how to participate in the in today's web event. So this is a depiction of the GoToWebinar attendee interface, and it is made up of two parts: the viewer window on the left, which displays the presentation, and the control panel on the right. I'll quickly navigate how to use the control panel so that you can readily participate in today's event. So by clicking on the orange arrow here, you can open and close your control panel. Here is where you can find all the information about the audio connection. We recommend that you dial in via telephone rather than through the computer, because it tends to limit feedback. To dial in, you will find the number and access code here, and along with your unique audio PIN. As you can see, all attendees are currently muted in listen-only mode. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. After the event, you will receive. At the end of the presentation, we will open it up for Q&A, and at this point, you can submit your questions via writing them in the question pane, and you can also raise your hand as well. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. After the event, we will receive an email with a link to the short evaluation and recording, and the recording will be available soon on our NCI YouTube page and ICC website in the next week. All right, well, at this point, I will start the presentation. So for those of you who don't know, the National Congress of American Indians was founded in 1944 and is the oldest, largest, and most representative American Indian and Alaska Native organization serving the broad interests of tribal governments and communities. And Indian Country Counts is NCI's initiative to encourage all American Indian and Alaska Natives to complete the 2020 census. What is civic engagement? So civic engagement means working to make a difference in the civic life of one's community and developing the combination of knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make that difference. It means promoting the quality of life in a community through both political and non-political processes. The importance of the census. So the census is a powerful information source that significantly influences U.S. policy. It is the foundation of American democracy, determining the allocation of congressional seats and redistricting of voting geographies. Nearly $1 billion in annual federal resources is allocated to Indian country based on census data. So nationally, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates that American Indians and Alaska Natives living on reservations or in native villages were undercounted by approximately 4.9% in the 2010 census, more than double the undercount rate of the next closest population group. And we are obviously working to make sure we bring that down. So right here, as you can see, is a map of the U.S. minus Hawaii and Alaska. And as of today, we are at 54.3% of response rates for the total U.S. And only 15 states are under 50% response rates, with a few states on track to be at or over 50% very soon. Minnesota and Iowa, as you can see, are in that dark blue, are leading all states with 64.9% for Minnesota and 62.3% for Iowa, respectively. I should note that these figures are for household response rates and not individuals. So the percentages are just based off the number of households that are in these particular states. So for our focus state today, we've chosen New Mexico. And as you can see on the slide, New Mexico is one of the states that is struggling due to the pandemic's effect on the census field operations. Much of the state is supposed to be contacted by the update leave, which is where the Census Bureau was to hand deliver an invitation and paper form to households, which appear in yellow on the left here, as you can see. And as a result, New Mexico is currently at 42.9% of their response rate, which is one of the lowest response rates to date. As you can see from the map, a lot of the counties, or a number of counties, I should say, are still below that 15% response rate. Now, obviously, it's not because they don't want to do it. It's more of sometimes they just don't have access to do it. And, just imagine what these numbers would look like if we didn't have this pandemic and the census operation was running at full steam. Now, in a fun fact, though, actually, Los Alamos County in New Mexico is the highest response rates by county for the entire country at 74.8%. So it shows you that, obviously, it's not just, it's just a matter of having that problem with the field operations being suspended. So on this slide, we just have kind of a snapshot of 8 of the many tribal nations that reside in New Mexico. Now, unfortunately, they have also been affected by the suspension of field operations as the response rates are very low. So from right to left, you have the Pueblo of Acoma, followed by Jicarilla Apache Nation, Pueblo of Laguna, Mescalero Apache Tribe, Oke Owenge, Pueblo of Picaris, Pueblo of Taos, and finally the Zuni tribe. And unfortunately, they are all pretty low at this point, but understandably, a lot of these households have not received their census forms as of yet. So in this slide, we wanted to just show you some examples of low response rates, low response rate states, I should say. And so in the snapshot here, you have Idaho, which is currently at 57.7% response rate, Montana, which is at 46.2% response rate, and finally Wyoming, which is at 45.4% response rate. So as you can see on the left, there's a lot of yellow in this map, and that's for those folks who were supposed to be receiving their first contact by the census through through a hand delivery of their census invitation form. And if you look on the right-hand side here, you can see kind of like where the yellow is on the one map and how those areas have responded. And a lot of those yellow areas, unfortunately, have very low response rates. And then for the areas that do have strong response rates, as you can see, they're in that blue and dark blue. All right, so at this point, I'm going to transition this off to Sandra Mitrovic, and she will give you some more updates on timeline and things going forward. So Sandra, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much, Matt. I'm
welcome.
Sandra Mitrovic. Hello? Matt, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Sorry, I think I responded you're welcome when you said thank you. So I'll go on mute now so I won't distract you.
No worries. No apologies for that, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Sandra Mitrovich. I'm currently serving as a Woman Man-Killer Fellow at National Congress of American Indians, as Matt mentioned. I'm a tribal citizen of Time Maidu and descendant of Yamani Maidu in Northern California. I'm serving in this fellowship to focus on civic engagement as we're talking about today's census and native vote. So getting to timeline updates, as you have all witnessed, we are day-to-day receiving timeline updates. And so we wanted to make sure that we gave out the most, at least recent information as it related to some of these operational updates as you see on your slide on the screen. So in some important tribal updates we really wanted to stress today is that self-response phase. That self-response phase has been extended to October 31st. We want to make sure people recognize that folks can still respond during this time. I know some people have been a little bit confused if they can still do self-response. Yes, until October 31st. As Matt mentioned just recently, we've been discussing what some people like to abbreviate as UL or UE, update leave, which is that is going to be delayed, and that's as on pause right now for field operations. As of right now, the date we've been given is resuming on June 13th. Update leave is focused on, just so people kind of have information regarding that. That update leave is where they would leave the forms at the address. They're not going to do any knocking with that, and so we're just kind of reminding folks that that's kind of leaving the form at the address, whereas update enumerate, it currently is suspended. Right now they're looking at how they're going to start back up that process. That update enumerate is actually doing enumeration right there as they provide the forms. You'll probably hear from the New Mexico Coalition leads, how are we going to do that with tribal communities, especially as we're concerned with people coming into community, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Mobile questionnaire assistance, that is currently also on hold and delayed, and we're going to try and get as much information as we can for U.S. Census Bureau on how they plan to deploy that moving forward. So looking at our frequently asked questions as it relates to COVID-19, or AKA the coronavirus. So the Census Bureau temporarily suspended the 2020 census field data collection activities in March. Steps are already being taken to reactivate those field offices, as we just previously mentioned, but of course they're looking at what that is going to look like as we continue to move forward through this process, and as geographically they're looking at those phases of where that will begin. In-person activities, including all interaction with the public in regard to update enumeration, office work and processing activities, they're going to include the most current guidance, promote health and safety of staff and public. So that will include some guidance as it relates to social distancing and how to utilize PPE. Once that data collection is complete, the Census Bureau will begin a lengthy and thorough process to produce the apportionment accounts. We know that there's a lot of questions regarding redistricting information, the statistical data products that they're still working on, some of those guidelines, and then how those dollars are then going to go to public and private sector spending for the year. And then in order to complete the count and ensure accuracy, the Census Bureau is seeking a statutory relief from Congress those additional days, as we had mentioned, to be able to deliver the final apportionment counts. And then under this plan, the Census Bureau would extend that window, as we just mentioned, for the field data collection and the self-response to October 30th, which would allow those counts to be delivered to the President by April 30th, 2021, and then redistricting data to be delivered to the states no later than July 31, 2021. This information you can gather also from the U.S. Census Bureau site. So now we're going into our frequently asked questions with counting college students. This has been a question that has come up a lot for us. Obviously, many of our college students have been sent home for the duration. And so we're reminding folks that they did send out, the Census Bureau and other organizations have sent out a chart, as you'll notice on your slide, talking about, okay, so I'm a college student and my campus is closed due to the pandemic. How do I take the census? So we're reminding individuals that if your college student lives on campus housing and were counted through their university as part of the group quarters operation, they're still going to be counted at that university in university dormitories. And if they lived specifically in our off-campus at like an apartment, they'll be counted there with where they had planned on staying during that time. And so there were a lot of questions for folks. So on the chart, it's pretty specific if you lived on campus or off campus. If you were on campus, campus administrators will include you in their count, so you're good to go. Just focus your energy on making sure your friends and family complete their census. If you lived off campus, fill out the census using that address. So again, if you lived in an apartment off campus but near campus, utilize that address still. But to make sure to include your roommates or housemates or remind them to fill that out. If you don't have your census ID specifically unique to that household, this is going to be a question that's going to come up consistently as it relates to tribal communities, and we'll get into this shortly. But we're reminding college students that they can still fill that out without that census ID on the phone, by mail, or online. And again, like I said, we'll get into the ID situation a little bit later for those that have questions. For counting incarcerated American Indians, as you note there, any incarcerated person, including juveniles, regardless of whether they lived in or outside of the state their prison is currently located, they're counted at that facility. Depending on the facility, prison administration or the prisoners themselves are responsible for filling out the census form. In light of COVID-19, we've heard through many different folks that the Census Bureau was working with prison administrators to ensure that they're not only taking the necessary precautions to ensure a safe and accurate count, but then also following through to ensure that all prisoners are counted when it relates to if they cannot fill out the census themselves. The Census Bureau will not assist in the recalculation, as we've noted that they did not change laws that related to utilizing home addresses in this census year, and those laws will not affect federal congressional districts. Just a brief reminder, if you have not received any invitation or mailing to take part in the 2020 census, we are reminding folks that there have been, due to the suspension of census field operations, many tribes have not received their invitations. I know that when we spoke to, for example, when we were working with folks from Alaska, they had mentioned that like 2/3 had received or have participated. They're in the update enumerate area and with forms, and that they still had 1/3 of their villages that still need to be counted. And then when you look across the country, and as we'll probably hear from our guest presenters today, many have not received those invitations. And specifically, many have not received the invitations with their, obviously with their unique ID to respond. So we've spoken to the Census Bureau, and they've recommended that if you haven't received the invitation, the census, it includes that census unique ID for the online form, then you should wait to receive before filling out the census. There's a reason for this. That unique ID ensures that all households are counted accurately. Some tribes have been given guidance that if they've already filled out their census form without that ID, that the Census Bureau is asking, once you receive that unique ID in follow-up, that you fill out that form again, just to be sure that the census and what they call in the follow-up universe, that they ensure that your household has been accurately counted. I know it's a little confusing, and I know we were also confused by this messaging that came out last week. The Census Bureau is creating like a one-pager document or a front and back two-pager document that's going to explain this in a little bit greater detail for those that have additional follow-up questions for the unique ID, but we can also talk about it a little bit here on this call a little bit later. Reminding our folks, we are doing an update currently to our toolkit, the Indian Country Counts toolkit, to remind folks about our hard to count within our hard to count. As many of you know, one of our hard to count populations are our children and babies under 5. And so we want to make sure that if folks are living in large and complex households, that we ensure that there's a count of all of our children. So as of April 1, you have a baby in the household, make sure, please, or children residing in your home, to make sure that they are counted. If children live with grandparents or aunts and uncles or other family members, or if we have family underneath one roof with multiple families, just make sure that all the kids in the family are counted. We also want to make sure that folks also realize that we want to ensure that all those dollars that come into our communities to support all of our resources, to include education, especially for our young ones, that we receive those apportionments. And now I'm going to turn the time back over to Matt Johnson to introduce our guest presenters, and we're very thankful to have them with us today.
Yes, thank you so much. And just one more thing from the previous slide I'll just mention is that this weekend, I think tomorrow or on Saturday is National Babies Day, which is why we wanted to remind folks that, hey, young children, of course, they're very important, and the census is really going to impact them. So we want to make sure that they are not forgotten in these counts. So we're going to transition over to our guest speakers who I'd introduced previously. They are Charlotte Lill, Jamie Glosaw, and Executive Director of the New Mexico Statewide Statewide, I'm saying it wrong here, I apologize. I want to make sure I get the exact title right here. The New Mexico Statewide Complete Count Committee. And so I'm actually going to throw it to our the executive director of the Native American Voters Alliance Education Project. So that is Tess Chavez. So Ms. Chavez, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Okay, I am going to go on mute, but just let me know, and this is for everyone, when you want me to transition to the next slide, just please say next slide, and I will move it forward for you.
Okay. Gotahelpa yaate shea ata Chavez yenishe bid atni nishle kis ani bashachin naske dene edeshache kis ani dashanele. Hello everyone, my name is Atadi Chavez, Folded Arms Clan from the Diné Nation, born for Pueblo. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. I am the Executive Director of the NAVA Education Project and NM Native Vote, both Native-led nonprofit organizations here in New Mexico. First of all, thank you for allowing us to speak to you today, and I hope each and every one of you and your families are safe and well during these unsettling times. We first entered the scene as an organization in 1992 when our previous ED, Lori Wiyaki, and crew began to organize to protect our sacred petroglyph sites outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, from a proposed road going through these lands. We managed to organize and actually fill an entire city council meeting hall, yet we're largely ignored because we were not considered voters. So at that point, we began organizing to start building an educated and informed and active Native voter bloc in New Mexico. First as part of Stage Council, and eventually Native American Voters Alliance, and now as two separate organizations, NAVA Education Project and NM Native Vote. In 2009, the NAVA Education Project was asked to help coordinate the tribal hard-to-count areas in the 2020 census efforts in New Mexico. And we started the NM Native Census Coalition. And that we were working with the 19 Pueblos within New Mexico, the 2 populated Apache nations in New Mexico, and also to provide support to the Navajo Nation CCC. At that point, our objective was to coordinate and implement a plan for accurate and complete counts in New Mexico, both within those tribal and urban communities. We were able to hire a media coordinator as well as a Pueblo and urban Native coordinator to help facilitate this objective. And they both will help to address some of the challenges that we have had to overcome and the number of pivots that we've had to make to be able to accomplish our goals to ensure an accurate count of tribal and urban communities in New Mexico. So with that, I would like to introduce our Pueblo coordinator. If you want to forward the slide, please. Her name is Charlotte Little. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Charlotte Little. I come from the Pueblos of San Felipe and Taos in the beautiful state of New Mexico, and I'm happy to join you here today and hopefully share some strategies perhaps that might work for you all who are dealing with the changes that have come about since the pandemic impacted our efforts. So as Otso was saying, mentioned, our monthly meeting, the coalition has monthly meetings, and we've had them once a month beginning in September through March. And at these sessions, we discuss issues that have come about, updates from the Census Bureau, financial support that might be available, and as well as questions and strategies for outreach. This is a network, and we worked very diligently to develop these networks of the tribal communities and urban populations in New Mexico. So one of the things that we did was we began this year by holding a retreat for tribal and urban CCCs and all of their team members. We were able to work on developing the networking of these CCCs. As you can imagine, if you've ever been to New Mexico or when you were taking a look at the map, some of us are in close proximity to each other. So, and we have a lot of marriages and relationships, so we're just all connected here as well. So again, at this session, at the retreat, we had tips and suggestions for best practices, strategies, and messaging. During this session, one of the most fun pieces was we were able to walk through with everyone a how-to on developing memes and videos on the importance of the census. So there's a picture included in this slide presentation, so you'll see that in a moment. In April, though, we began, especially after we had planned to start meeting biweekly, and the pandemic actually just moved our opportunity to do that up. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a picture of everybody that was at the retreat, and it was very well attended. We had representatives from all of the tribal nations in New Mexico. We had members of the Census Bureau. Some of them you can see are tribal partnership specialists. We had tribal leaders attending. At the front left of the table are the governor and lieutenant governor of the Pueblo of Jemez. Also attending were the lieutenant governor from the Pueblos of Tesuque, and Zuni's tribal council people as well were there. So it was really fantastic to have everybody there. Next slide, please. Thank you. So those memes I was telling you about, we had a blast creating these. These were, people are so clever. Indian humor never fails to make you laugh or make a statement, but this is what we had, some of the ones that had been developed at the retreat. Next. So in my role as a coordinator, I've been brought on to coordinate and lead the implementation. Every tribal community in New Mexico has a CCC, Complete Count Committee, established. So they are there on the ground, and we provide technical support and assistance, and that comes in the way of maybe helping them apply for funding, developing messages for marketing, media, and public service announcements. As you saw, we also host meetings and facilitate networks. We also, many of us on the team, attend any meeting that's associated with the census. In large part, it's been very important lately because of the changes. We also facilitate meetings and webinars, and as well, we had been providing updates to tribal leaders through the beginning of the year. We're looking forward, rather, to meeting with them again. Our role also is to interface with the tribal partnership specialists who are Census Bureau employees and to augment their efforts because there's definitely some things that government employees cannot do, but as community-based organizations, we have the opportunity to help to get the message out in a way that we are able to do so. Next, please. So before, as you heard Sandra describe, before March 2020, our communication strategy included events in the communities. Each one of them had started pretty much about October. Veterans Day, they had Halloween activities such as trick or treat. I never knew what that was. I do know now. It's Head Start. In this case, Head Start children were invited to come to the tribal administration offices, and there would be treats outside so they didn't have to wander through the buildings and try to work with them getting through the buildings. They were outside, and the goodies were placed in the trunk of the employees' cars, so they had a blast. Games and prizes as well. Other activities also included informational pieces that came with their Thanksgiving turkey gifts. There have also continued to be social media posts, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media spots were also being utilized to get the message out. Next, please. Thank you. So as Sandra was saying before, she's already described what the fallout has been since the Census Bureau had to make adjustments. So in New Mexico, the tribal leadership of just about every community chose to close their borders to non-residents, and we respected that. We also stepped back for a little bit while they were working very diligently to mitigate the chances of the virus entering their community. So only 4 Pueblos and the Navajo Nation had a partial update leave process started. They definitely were not completed. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham issued a stay-at-home order to prevent the further spread. In New Mexico, it's now been extended to May 15th. As Sandra mentioned, the Census Bureau had adjusted the timelines, messages, and advertisements urging people to complete their census form online. This became a little troublesome because our communities were asking, how about us? How come we're not doing anything? So next slide. So as you described, there was confusion over the questionnaires received in the mail, largely because of the addressing. So we also, as a coalition, agreed to urge people to wait for the forms. Later, the Census Bureau, the state, and all of our partners agreed, yes, let's urge people to wait for forms. We don't want to have them have to fill it out twice. So part of the concern about what's happening in our community, we see the commercials. I mean, indeed, when I heard the drums on the commercials, my head would pop out of my, I would lift my head up and run to the TV to hear. It's like, I hear drums, I hear drums. And so there were mixed messages. They were all being urged in Indian country to fill out the forms, but they hadn't received them in New Mexico and in other tribal and rural areas. So a flyer was created. I'm going to show it to you in a second. These flyers were distributed in children and elder meal packages. They were posted. They were available to use in social media. And unfortunately, but it's all right, we have to revise this to include a message to wait for their forms. Next, please. And this is the slide we used. And these pieces of communication, these flyers and other materials were created by an incredible team that's headed up by Kim Baca of KB Consulting. She and her team have worked to help develop not just this flyer, but we have an entire website that was established to share with our CCCs, and that website is available, and the materials within it are available on our website. So we'll give you the information here in a moment. So take a look at this. Okay, next, please. So other activities that were taking place that we've been able to continue with since all of this happened was we held an Indigenous town hall on April 9th. And if you've seen the cartoon strip, Without Reservations by the amazing Ricardo Cate, we were thrilled to have him as our host. At that session, we provided a lot of information, as you might have seen other town halls on the census provide. But we also included the Native Census Challenge was announced, and I don't think we added the picture of the winners, but I do want to let you know we did have some technical difficulties. However, the video is available at our website, and there it is, nmnativecensus.org. We'll have that available for you again later in this presentation. So now we're targeting the June 13th date for update leave to begin in New Mexico. This, of course, we acknowledge depends on the tribes that are and whether they'll be ready to accept employees from the Census Bureau to come onto tribal lands. We don't know how that's going to be set up. However, the Census Bureau is and our tribal partnership specialists are working on that. We will be joining them as well. So in working to see how the schedule is going to be set up in New Mexico. In the meantime, we continue to gather information from the enrollment offices, tribal utilities, housing, realty, communication entities, etc. Many of our tribal communities have these programs within their tribal government. So what we want to do is not only use VAN, the automated system that's normally used for voting, getting out the vote, but we're utilizing that to target and get out the count. So we're going to be getting training for virtual phone banking. We're going to use text messaging trees. We're also going back to some old school ideas, such as bulk mail for postcards. We didn't want to go dark, and so the things that we've done, like sending out that the flyer that you saw earlier, is helping us to keep the messages out there. Next, please. So a few other things to mention before I finish up here is the tribal partnership specialists have been fantastic in working with us, providing, keeping us up to date on things that are happening, and working with us to figure out how we can pivot and change things up. One of the really great ideas that came from a tribal partnership specialist is she was a former IHS employee, had a great relationship within the Albuquerque area. So she's making a request to the Indian Health Service to allow flyers and information sheets to be placed in the pharmacy bags, and that was really fantastic, I thought. We don't know how that's been received yet, but the Indian Health Service so far has been a good partner as well, though their time has been consumed with the pandemic. So as we're also beginning to prepare for canvassing, whenever the time becomes safe, whenever it's safe to do so, we recognize we're also going to need to take a look at having PPEs, I never knew what that was before this. I do know now, and it's personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, covering if needed, and so on for the people that may have one-to-one contact with people. We're also working to help our census members gather and purchase their electronic equipment, whether that's tablets, phones, hotspots, and so on. We will be developing scripts and training programs for them as well. One of the things that we recognize, it must be said, is that most of our CCC members are actually part of the tribal government. These are the doers, the people that get things done in the communities, and they were tasked to be a part of the CCCs. So we try to take the load off of them by developing things such as scripts and flyers and developing the training courses. Courses is after talking with them to find out what their needs are. So we're going to be ready. Again, going back to the canvassing, we're going to be ready to collect data. Reports will be made weekly about the attempts that have been made, conversations that have been actually taken place, and the response rates within each of the communities. We're looking at setting up regional hubs for networking, having a session like this through Zoom for the 8 northern Pueblos, the 10 southern Pueblos, and including the Navajo and Apache and Mescalero nations in these regions as well. Finally, we're also working on getting a public service video by Congresswoman Deb Haaland. So we have a lot to do until the final questionnaire is done in October. So I'm sure we're going to be pivoting to and modifying what we're doing to allow for those adjustments that may be coming. So I appreciate the opportunity to tell you about what's happening in the tribal communities. And I'd like to introduce Jamie Gloshay, who is the Urban Census Coordinator, and we also are lucky to have her. She serves as the Tribal Subcommittee Chair for the New Mexico Statewide Complete Count Committee. So, Jamie?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Next slide, please. Yat H, Jamie Gloshay, Yanisha Makaidena, Nishla Senajani Edashiche, Zafagai Bashichin. My name is Jamie Gloshay. I'm Navajo, White Man Apache, and Kiowa. Thank you so much for giving us this time. I'll try to be as quick as possible. I sit on the New Mexico Statewide Complete Count Commission with Atsa Chavez as well, the Secretary of Indian Affairs, Lynn Trujillo, Keegan King, who works at Indian Affairs, as well as Alvin Warren, who was previously with the Kellogg Foundation and previous Secretary of Indian Affairs at the statewide, at the governor's cabinet level. So our state has actually been pretty invested in supporting this effort, not only the statewide effort, but with respect to tribal communities. In 2019, the state of New Mexico allocated $3.5 million to support outreach efforts. And just recently in February allocated an additional $8 million because realistically 20% of our community is update leave. So we work in many different spaces. Alvin really worked with the 2020 New Mexico Census Collaborative to raise funds for our efforts. As Atsa mentioned, and Charlotte, really working with the tribe CCCs as well as media. And then the Indian Affairs Department really serves as a convening state department, but also the allocation of the state monies. What I'm working on is specifically respective to the urban population in Albuquerque, and then informing other urban populations on how to work not only with tribes, but with Native communities. And then just some background, in 2010, I actually oversaw the operations of Navajo Nation for the census count in 2010. So next slide, please. So just to give you some context about Albuquerque, we rank 7th in the nation with the highest population of urban Native communities, people. It's estimated that there are over 400 tribes represented here who reside and travel for school, work, commerce. I'm sure a lot of people know that Albuquerque is the definite hub. In 2010, it was based on Census Bureau data, Native Americans actually account for about 6% of the city's population. At the state level, we account for about 10%. And there was some other interesting data when we were looking at how are we going to do this outreach, what are the challenges in Albuquerque. But we also, from a recent 2019 Albuquerque point in time count that was spearheaded by the Coalition to End Homelessness, found that 44% of the homeless population are actually Native American. Next slide. So we essentially identified key stakeholders. One, of course, is the Bureau, city and county government, surrounding tribal governments. We have Santa Ana Pueblo, Escuela Pueblo, Sandia Pueblo, the Navajo Nation that is adjacent to city and county boundaries, as well as a wealth of Native-led, Native-serving, community-based organizations, other CBOs that do a lot of social work, social justice work, schools. We have like SIPI here in Albuquerque, Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute, Navajo Tech, tribal-owned colleges. UNM has a huge Native population, Central New Mexico Community College as well as healthcare. We have the First Nations Community Health Source, as well as Indian Health Service here in Albuquerque, and tons of Native-led or Native-owned businesses. Next slide. One of the key partnerships we had identified that has actually worked really well with us is the City of Albuquerque, specifically the Office of Equity Inclusion and the Office of Native American Affairs. Our mayor has been pretty supportive of supporting city government to tribal government relationships, as well as putting in a commission on American Indian Alaska Native Affairs to serve the interests of the Native community here in Albuquerque. So I feel like that has been really supportive of our efforts. And then within that as well, there's also the Native American Homelessness Task Force. So we've been able to intersect at multiple spaces to look at the challenges, but also leverage how this is supporting the health and well-being of the urban Native community. Next slide. So some of the requests that we've done within the Urban Native CCC with the work we do with tribal communities, and then with all the Native-led, Native-serving organizations. We actually have a Native Leaders collective that requested the mayor do a call to action, like a PSA, so we have that on the website. Sponsor billboards in the city, youth community centers like senior centers, youth centers, libraries, so that our communities can have access not only to internet, but also spaces where they can respond to the census. And then support with printing. We ask for bus service, like a free Census Day bus ride, as well as bus passes for our transient unsheltered population, and then bus wraps for media. And then just the additional request to just disseminate information throughout all of their departments. Next slide. So just to give you an idea of the different Native-led organizations, which are both local and national, we have the All Pueblo Council of Governors that actually works with all the 19 Pueblos here in Albuquerque. Albuquerque Public Schools, the Indian Education Department, has been a great partner, and they actually have access to over 5,000 Native families in Albuquerque. National Indian Youth Council, the American Indian Chamber of Commerce, Americans for Indian Opportunity have also been a great partner, the Coalition Stop Violence Against Native Women, and then the National Indian Council on Aging, as well as a Native American Community Academy, to name a few. So one of our strategies is really to work with the Native-led, Native-serving CBOs to work within their networks to make sure we get that word out there as far as education. But now, in light of the delay in update leave communities, one of the strategies we've identified is we're really needing to call on our urban Native community to show up for all of our tribal communities until the Census Bureau figures out what's going to happen with update leave. But also to that point, with respect to the unsheltered population, how do we pivot within group quarters and service-based enumeration, since a lot of our homeless population in Albuquerque is Native. Next slide. Yeah, so that's it. I'd like to turn it over to Atsa. I appreciate all the support, and thanks so much.
Atsa, are you there?
Hi. Just in case she might have had to take a call or something.
Hello?
This is Charlotte. Oh, you got it.
Hi,
Atsa.
can you hear me?
Hi.
I'm here.
Yes.
Sorry, I had to take myself off of mute. I apologize for that. Thank you, Jamie, Charlotte, and Kim. New Mexico really appreciates all of the hard work you've been doing and your dedication. We've had an amazing team put together. You can find more information about our coalition at the website www.nmnativecensus.org. We can all be reached on the Contact Us portion of the website. There's a drop-down box that lets you either reach myself, Kim, Jamie, or Charlotte. Our contact information is also on this particular slide. Please feel free to contact any one of us if you have any additional questions, and please feel free to use the materials that are on our download site. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all. In this time, we are sending blessings and prayers to all of you and your communities to continue to stay safe, to be healthy, and be well. Thank you. Ahihat, Bamak, Bamakohopa.
Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. I just want to, real quick, if there's any questions out there, I know we still have a little bit more of the presentation, but we really wanted to make sure that everything was covered with our presenters, so I really appreciate that. If you have any questions, please go ahead and write them in the questions pane now. I will tell you that real quick, I know that Kim Baca, who didn't speak, but works on, as she mentioned, works on with the organization and help create a lot of these funding. Then many of the items are on the New Mexico Native Census Coalition website under the resources page. So if you look to the resources page, you should be able to find that information there. I'm not seeing any questions, and just because obviously we want to respect folks' time, I'm going to go ahead and just move forward. But please, again, if you have questions or have anything, feel free to write them in the question pane. I'm going to throw this back to Sandra now, who will go through the next few slides. So Sandra, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Matt. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Fantastic. First and foremost, I want to say wenen, which is thank you in my language to all of our presenters. I had the chance to be on some of those New Mexico calls and listen to just the absolute sheer dedication and work your team is putting in, and I just want to say thank you so much for not only all the work that you're doing, transitions that you're making, and the strategies that you're taking. And please always let Matt and I know, and our civic engagement team at NCAI know how we can continue to support those efforts that you're doing, and whatever we can do to strengthen that, we would love to do. The time for talk is over, as you all just mentioned, that now is the time for action. And how do we do this? And especially in light of all the changes that we're making. We know that self-response is here, right? That time frame has already passed and begun. We know that we're having to kind of switch our strategy and be very inventive. I loved the town hall, and especially I'm excited to watch the video that you posted. It's actually one of my favorite comic strips, and I actually have a couple books by that artist, and so I was very excited to see that. And so how do we be strategic? How do we continue to be that ally and advocate in our community? And as you heard in New Mexico, how they're continuing to be those allies and advocates in their community, but not just in the specific communities. You also heard about a strategy of a network. We're all in this together. We know that. We have to participate in supporting one another through this effort, and however that's going to look. And so unlike elections, which occur on one day, the census self-response time, as we know, now is beyond. That time frame has expanded. And so with that is a little bit of a double-edged sword. So sometimes with the expanded time, you have a little bit more time, but we're also facing some other things obviously going on during that time. We've heard from a lot of our coalitions that they're worried about continuing to motivate folks to do this work and to stay on task with getting the census done. But first and foremost, as you heard on the call, we're first and foremost worried about the health and safety of our community. We want to keep everyone safe, we want to keep everyone healthy, and we want to do it in the way that makes sense for our communities because we know them best and we know how to work with our families. And so that's another thing that we're going to ensure that we at NCAI and our civic engagement team are encouraging support of those creative plans that you're making within your community. We've heard of some of your strategy in New Mexico and what you're doing. On other calls, we've heard from other states about what they're doing, but also what their needs are from other organizations to help them do that work. And so we'll continue in that effort. Thank you for sharing that flyer about the unique ID. That was very, very crucial and important, and a step that you took in messaging to your communities in the way that was trusted and helpful. So thank you for that. We will definitely uplift that. Next slide, please. So examples from other tribal nations, we know that the strategies have changed as New Mexico mentioned in their efforts where people may have created in-person events that they were going to host over this time. We are now focusing on moving to virtual networking and other opportunities. We've seen everything from, as you mentioned, virtual town halls to in New Mexico, they have their census mini concerts to virtual bingo, virtual Jeopardy, and other activities. We have seen such a great effort in our tribes being strategic and changing their method of delivery of swag that you see on the bottom of the slide. For example, messaging from their tribal chairman, such as Yakima, and how they have their shirts, and that tribes are still delivering their Indian Country Counts t-shirts out to community, and also, as you note there, the Native Pride, Native Counted shirt that is their own symbol and logo that they created. People are doing this in various different ways. They're doing online raffles. They're putting them, as you had just mentioned, putting information into the prescription bags, but food drops and other places. And so we're definitely supportive of those efforts and encourage. We did a tribal mail out to all of our tribal leadership and encourage them to continue to message. Examples from other tribal nations, as you note on the screen, people have gone to putting up billboards, whether they be virtual billboards or those that are just standalone billboards. Washoe tribe have put out stickers and things, and people have done yard signs. So a lot more signage. We're seeing New Mexico mentioned when they heard the ads on TV or the ads on the radio. We've seen a lot more of those as well. Some updates on NCAI initiatives, as you note on the screen, and it was mentioned on the New Mexico call, we are having to shift a lot of our work to virtual. So we have included an update to our toolkit. We'll be getting that out and on our website, our Indian Country Counts website, that includes some additional ads, some additional information on that hard to count population, and also virtual canvassing. We've heard a lot from our calls every 2 weeks when we do these webinars. One of the greatest parts is we hear back also from coalition leads that say, here are some of our challenges, here are some of the things that we need, here are some of the tools that we would love to have. And so one of those things is virtual canvassing. We have a guide that we'll be putting up on our Indian Country Counts website that talks about how do you do virtual canvassing? How do you do this outreach to your community? And what are some ways to maybe even script that so that even if you're leaving a voicemail, that it has the most impact or gives information. The other thing that we've done is a Native Youth Challenge. As many of you guys have seen, we did a TikTok and Instagram challenge with our Native youth to get them engaged in the census and also families. And so it was a great way just to, one, get people motivated and excited, but also, as you saw with the New Mexico memes, we love comedy, we love humor. That's how we get through, I think, a lot and continue and maintain that resiliency that we do in our Native communities. And so this is another great way to just keep us connected. And we have such great entries, and our youth are just extremely creative. We'll be announcing that soon so that you can see the videos that they put forward, and then also pictures with their prizes that they won. to our call to action, one of the things that we are going to continue to do, and New Mexico noted this very well, we need to stay connected to community. And so every 2 weeks we have a broadcast that goes, so we have it kind of interchanging, where we have a broadcast that goes out to community that kind of talks about some of the updates, whether they be policy updates or updates as it relates to Operation Timeline in our census broadcast. And that goes out to our currently to our listserv. If you're not on that listserv, we're going to give you the information shortly on how to get on that listserv. So we give out information there, but then also we follow it back up with a webinar the following week and do some highlights from a region, just like you heard us do some regional highlights with New Mexico. And we're also kind of just, again, coming back to connecting through phone banking, connecting through mail outs and things like that. It's just constantly that communication and keeping connected with our communities across the country. We want to make sure that that happens so that everybody feels that they have the most up-to-date information as quickly as we receive it to provide it to others. Next slide, please.
I did advance
Matt,
the slide, Sandra. Yes, I can hear you. I did advance the slide. Can you not see it?
Oh, it did. It finally updated. I'm sorry. So policy update. Sorry about that, Matt. It was delayed for a sec. So policy update. The administration is asking to extend that deadline for the Census Bureau to report its state's counts to the president April 30th, as we mentioned before, 2021, and then sending that redistricting data to states by July 31st, 2021. On April 24th, the president signed the interim COVID-19 relief bill, which set aside $750 million for tribal nations and updated the Paycheck Protection Program interim rule to allow the gaming eligibility. I know you guys have all paid close attention to that. We've also at NCAI had some updates to that as well. And you can also look at that on our website at ncai.org. The Senate has announced that it will return to Washington next week to begin debating another stimulus bill. However, the House reversed its decision to return next week. So the debate on the new stimulus bill may be delayed for those of you that are following that. It's possible that the requested extensions for the census, as well as more funding for mail-in voting, could be included in that package. If you weren't aware, we've already started, and I know we had a wonderful presentation by us on the Native voting front. And so we're very fortunate to have heard that update today from her and their team in New Mexico. We have a lot of voting webinars that are coming online in the next, or at least they've started over the past couple of weeks to talk about how that mail-in voting affects, obviously, our tribes and what that looks like. And so NARF, Native American Rights Fund, hosted by the Leadership Conference, did a webinar today. I know they're going to be sending out that recording shortly from that webinar if you weren't able to get on. There were several webinars at 1 p.m. Eastern today, and so they'll be sending out that recording, but we have a few more kind of up in the works. And so I know that's another really big hot topic we'll be discussing. On Tuesday, a federal judge ruled that the $8 billion set aside for tribes in the recent stimulus package we had talked about that couldn't be given to corporations owned by Alaska Natives, siding with tribes. I know many of you have followed that as well, and the funds intended for tribal governments and essential services. We just want to make sure that constantly you guys have updates to policy as well. So if you have questions about policy updates, please again visit our ncai.org page, and we also have our policy team at NCAI that gives those updates.
And Sandra, if you can hear me, I just want to say this ruling is just about the most recent stimulus package that was at $8 billion. That's just for that funding. So in the future, if there is another stimulus bill, that doesn't mean that those corporations won't be eligible for it. It's just in this particular one, they ruled that the language said that it was specifically for tribal governments and not to be given to corporations.
Thank you, Matt. So in terms of elections updates, we also want to follow up with this. Nearly all primaries from mid-March through April have been delayed to May or June due to COVID-19 pandemic. Ohio held its presidential primary on Tuesday using primarily mail-in voting. with in-person voting curtailed to only those without mailing addresses and those who have disabilities that require in-person voting. It has appeared to have been held without any problems and no reports of any issues. New York, which initially delayed its presidential primary from April to June, has canceled it due to concerns over voter safety and the consolidation of the Democratic Party behind Vice President Biden as their nominee. However, other elections will still occur on their regularly scheduled dates. States are currently looking into expanding their mail-in and absentee voting options, and lawmakers are pushing for more funding to assist in expanding these options. I know we'll all be following this closely as this continues. Recent polling has shown an increase in support for an all mail-in election. However, the majority still prefers having multiple options to vote. The webinar that was held with NARF and Leadership Conference today also stressed the same, the multiple options. The majority did support allowing mail-in voting without providing specific excuse. Next slide, please. So now we're here in our questions section, and I'm going to turn this back over to Matt so that he can start moderating any questions or opening it up to the audience.
Well, thank you, Sandra, so much. And yes, you know, a lot of updates are coming fast and furious, and we're trying our best to make sure we keep everyone up to date on things. So feel free right now to write in any questions you might have on the question pane. If you're on your phone and you'd like to speak up about maybe something you're doing in your community that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear that as well. You know, especially because we want to make sure that, you know, as we're sharing ideas, maybe there's something there that you didn't think about. I know I've heard a lot of really ingenious ways that people have been participating, and actually one of our attendees had to jump off, but they wrote in the question pane that that the California Native Project is going to be hosting a May the 4th Be With You Census live stream event on their Facebook page and Twitter page on May 4th, starting at 12:30. I assume that's California time. And they said prizes will include a Peloton, so that's actually pretty great. You know, if you're a fan of biking, that sounds like a heck of a prize. So. And plus, I'm a big Star Wars fan myself, so I think I'm just going to check it out for the tie-in there. But, you know, for anybody who has any questions, feel free to write it in the questions pane or anything like that. Pendleton. Oh, I'm sorry. I misread that. That's not Peloton. That's Pendleton. So I apologize. I saw Peloton and my brain went to biking, so I apologize. And either way, you know, feel free to jump on. I'm going to put the make sure, just check to see everybody's audio here is, I'm going to unmute everybody or give everybody the option to unmute themselves. So I'm just going to do that right now. And I do have a question in here from Brian Barlow. He said, where can we find that in written form? Okay. So that's, he was asking a question about the community assistance grants that the Indian Country Council has given out. We have extended that to August 2nd. The deadline was, depending on when you got it, the deadline was, you know, the end of February, and then we had extended it to April 1st, and then now, because of everything that's happening with the pandemic, we've extended all the way out to August 7th. In terms of written form, I don't know if that exists anywhere that I could give that, but I want to make sure that we send that. So Brian, I'll do that offline, but I'll make sure to send you an up-to-date letter that shows that we've extended that. I know we've sent an email about it, but if obviously we need it in writing, we'll be happy to extend that to you. Okay, well, I don't see any questions, and I know we've kind of already gone 10 minutes over our time here. So, folks, I think I'm just going to go ahead and wrap things up, only because I want to be respectful of your time. I know we've gone over a little bit, but I do see a raised hand. Hold on, from Beverly. Let me see if I can unmute you, Beverly, if you'd like to say something. You are unmuted, Beverly, so go ahead.
Hey, Matt. A lot of tribes here in Nevada are getting really, really frustrated with $8 billion that will be dispersed. So there's people on the eastern side of Nevada that are, looking for food banks, they're looking for other resources, they're looking for PPEs. And so I just wanted to find out if you know exactly when money will start being distributed to tribes and how that distribution is going to occur.
That is a great question, Beverly, and I appreciate it. I myself don't know, and Sandra, please feel free to jump in if you know. I would steer you towards our COVID site, which does have information from our policy team. I haven't heard of any deadlines as of right now, or like when the money is supposed to be being sent out and how it's supposed to be sending out. Sandra, do you know anything on that?
So, Matt, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
So, Beverly, great question. And I would, for us, I would say going to that website, that is the best place for us, the ncai.org website. When you go there, we don't have, if you look on a lot of this messaging that has gone out, and we're talking about and how does that get distributed? I know I don't have the answer to that question, and Matt had just mentioned he doesn't have the answer to that question. I know that's a question that a lot of folks are still asking, is how is that disbursement plan going to be fulfilled? And we don't have that. So what I would encourage you to go to is that ncai.org site. And as Matt mentioned, we do have our policy team that would be working on that, and also our COVID-19 site that is going to be updating. That is our task force that's going to be updating as well. But as soon as, obviously, when NCAI has that information, we usually send out what's called an action alert out as soon as we have that information, and it goes out to our listserv. And if you're not on that listserv, let us know. But definitely that's where it goes. And then they also put it up on their news page, which when you get right onto the site, it's broken up into sections that has initiatives, news, and events, and they'll put it there. So that's kind of, I wish I could give you a, strategic plan of action of how they're going to do it, but we don't have that either.
Yes, unfortunately, that's some information that we don't have right now. And as soon as we get it, as Sandra mentioned, we usually send out an action alert to our full listserv, so that when if you're on our listserv, you should be receiving those action alerts. Any other questions? Anybody else need anything that we might be able to answer for you? All right. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and just go to our last slide here, which is our thank you. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us, and we want to please extend our thanks to our guest speakers, Charlotte, Antez, and Jamie, for joining us today, and really just going over what's happening in New Mexico right now. It was a really great explanation, and we're just excited to hear that you guys obviously are not waiting around for things. You guys are moving forward and trying to do your best to get things together, and we just really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And also, just for those, here's our contact information. If you would like to join our listserv, if you aren't already on it, you can please email us at census@ncai.org. You can also check out our website, indiancountrycounts.org. And if you'd like to follow us on Twitter, our handle is @NCAI1944. We are constantly trying to update things and put the new and best information out there for folks so that they know what's going on, how they can best respond not only to what's happening with the census, but also just COVID-19 in general. So just thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I'm just going to go ahead and end. And again, thank you, everybody, so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.